Hi, I'm Tim Von Ruden here at cgcookie.com, and welcome to part 3 of this character series in which I will be focusing on the hair and the face. And the reason I do this first is once it's finished, I believe it sort of sets the tone for the rest of the character. It becomes a lot easier for me to move on to the clothes once I know the face and the hair are done. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be using the same color palette that I used in the last tutorial, and I'm going to be using a hard edge brush and a flattened hard edge brush to complete it. So with that, let's get started. So starting off, I'm going to choose the far left concept, continue with, and follow through to the end. And right now, I am merging the line art and the base color layer that I did in the first and second part of the tutorial. And the reason I'm doing that is so that it's easier for me to mask out and liquefy the character whenever I want to. And it's much easier to do that on one layer. So in the source files, you can download this PSD, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to save out a layer of each of the different steps that I take. So whenever I feel like I made a significant progress, I'll save that character layer out and then I'll hide it, but I'll make a copy of it first so that I'll continue working on the copy. So with the concept, I like to first do a little cleanup work and clear out some of that sketchiness that I might have left over from the initial line art. And when I do the hair and face, I tend to go back and forth between the two. So once I get the hair to a level of detail that I'm pretty satisfied with, then I'll move on to the face and try to match that same level of detail. And I'll keep doing this back and forth until I feel it's, to a point where I am comfortable calling it done. And I'm trying to focus with the hair on keeping a nice movement to it. I want to keep it looking very fluid and very natural in the way that it is pulled back into that ponytail and then the way that it's going to swoop behind her. And since this is almost not, I don't want to say stylized, but it isn't full on realism, I can kind of play with adding some nice shapes to the hair and have a little fun with it, but at the same time, I don't want it to come across either cartoony or it looks off-putting. So I still want to keep a nice flow to the hair. And with the face, I'm going to be focusing on the proportions and making sure that the facial structure is in check with the overall head shape and that the hair doesn't look either too big or too small on top of it. So then here, with the hair, I like to work dark first and then I build up my different values with the lighter reds. And when working with hair, I always recommend that you want to work with the movement of the hair in your brushstrokes and your line work. And don't feel like you have to draw every individual strand of the hair. It almost looks more unnatural when you do that versus trying to clump it together in different shapes. And that way, I personally believe it looks better in the end as well. So then here, I'm just doing some cleanup work on the neck, and then I'm going right back into the hair. So you can see where I'll have this sort of back and forth where I felt the neck needed more detail to it, so I quickly just went in, got it done, and then went back to the hair. So it's all about the process of the piece. So even as I build up the different facial features, you can see how my mind's changing and what I like and what I don't like and how I'm changing it. So here I feel like the hair is at a point that I need to get my face to the same level of detail at. And I usually like to start with the eye because I always felt like the eye is the center of attention for whenever you're looking at a character. That's something that my eye always gravitates to, so I want to get that looking nice, and then I'll work my other facial features pretty much around and based off that eye. So I'm just building up, simple values with my whites with the specularity, and that way it almost adds like an instant value to it and shine. So it gives the texture and material some properties to it as well. And this angle that I have her head at is a little strange for me. So doing the other eye was a little tough, and that's something that I'm not, scared to admit. It took me a few times to get it right. But when you work at this kind of angle, you really have to think about the facial structure and how that eye would be placed inside of the head. And sometimes if I get too frustrated with it, I'll move on to a different section. Like here, I'm moving on to the hair because I was just a little frustrated with that side of the face. And I knew I could come back to it later when maybe I can see it at a different perspective. And then I'm also pushing some of that skin into the hair as if you can see the scalp and where the hair comes out. And I'm adding a black, and you'll see it more later. I'm adding the black to the actual base of the hair color because I see it more as like she's dyeing her hair red rather than it's naturally red. So I'm showing some of her roots to indicate that. And now here I'm using the liquefy filter, and that's just to do some quick push and pulls and trying to get that feeling of that her right eye better for me to draw on top of. And I'm also trying to keep in mind that that side of the face is in shadow as well. So I'm trying to stick with those darker colors. And now here I added a hair strand that would be on the other side of her face. And to do that really quickly without having to draw over the face, I made a new layer underneath of the character and I just drew it on from there. Now here I felt like the jawline and the bottom jaw needed some fixing up and repositioning, so I did that really quick. And then I just melded it into the rest of the head that I did. And then from here I moved back into the hair. So you can see how there's like a flow to this character. And it's almost like a painting where, you know, you're working on different areas based on how you feel and where you think you could work on next. And I really liked how the back of that ponytail looked. So then later on I'm trying to get that same feel to that on the other side of the face where the hair ends off. And I'm also adding in a few strands of just that highlighted red to really add to the fact that this is hair. It's not, you know, red of cloth or water or something. That movement is coming from hair. And then you can really see this is why I really like the ponytail, on how I clump hair into different shapes. And I do that a lot because I feel it gives off a better impression of hair rather than trying to draw individual strands everywhere. And when I'm highlighting hair, I usually like to do highlights in the center. So then I'll build up, that's a slow value based on where the light source is coming from, and then I'll use the highest saturated red that I have selected, and then I'll just touch it up in the center areas of those different values. So then here's where I did more of that black indication for the root line. And then now I feel, for whatever reason, I felt comfortable enough to get back into the face. So it's always a back and forth with me on doing the hair and face structure. So in here, using my own tips that I do when I did the facial resources, is with the lip, I try to think of a bean in that corner, and then I'll try to shade it accordingly. And it's funny that after I did those, like the eye, the nose, the mouth, the ear resource tutorials, I think about them every single time I do a character piece now. And then I try to put my own tips into my work. And then working with the lips, I'll usually build up a nude lip first just to get a base value down. And then from there, I'll work on my colors on top, depending on what the character is and what I believe their lip color would be. So for her, I'm just going to do sort of a neutral lip color where it's just pink. And then I can either do this with overlays or just basic normal layers. And I'll just build up my color values, and then I'll add a specularity to it with that white. So you can see on that bottom lip, it really rounds it out if you just add a little bit of white to it. And white is like easily the best color to use when you're working with skin on trying to round something off really fast. So like on the nose, I use that white for the specularity, like in the eye pockets. It's something that you want to almost be more aware of when you're looking at professional work and where they place the white in their facial structures and how that rounds out a face so well, so quickly. And here in the close-up view, you can really see the different placements that I had. So in here, I'm just doing more cleanup work all around. And then I will usually pull back from my piece and try to look at it as a whole rather than try to stay zoomed in the entire time. And that way, I'm not over-focusing on my piece, and that way I can keep moving. Because that's something that I always want to keep thinking to myself is always keep moving. Don't be, stuck focusing in on an area and over-detailing, because otherwise then it'll look over-rendered in the end. And that's something I always try to remind myself as I'm doing character pieces. And throughout this piece, I've only been using the circle brush and the flattened version of the circle brush. And that's because I'm asked a lot if I use special skin brushes or different filters or masks or layer modes. And really I don't. I try to keep it very basic. And for this tutorial series specifically, I wanted to show you guys that all it takes is just simple drawing and time. And with just a circle brush, you can create something pretty cool. So don't feel like you are like intimidated by all the different options that Photoshop offers, or if you watch tutorials on other people and how they work, just know that you can get really great results with just the basics. And here I am completely erasing the original hair that I had on the left side, and I'm trying to replace it with more of a corkscrew motion to it. And I didn't want it to just be a normal wavy ponytail. I wanted there to be some cool movement and almost like a design work to the hair. So then here, like, I'm using my darker reds to indicate like where that curl of the hair would be, and then I'm using my lighter reds to indicate that it's closer to the viewer, and that's why there's those lighter reds. And then here I'm going back and forth and I'm trying to match what I have on the left side with the right side. So normally I would do this all in one go. That way I'm not working at the end trying to build up my hair to make it look like a different section of the hair. But since this was kind of isolated on the left side and I didn't really like the initial laydown that I did, I left it till the end. So better late than never, and I don't mind drawing hair. It's one of my favorite things to draw. I would say the eyes are my number one favorite, and then hair would be number two. And it's because the eyes, I feel, draw the attention the most, and then the hair is the second most for me. Those are the two things I always look at when I'm looking at different character concept pieces. And then here I'm using that highlighted red to really add an effect to it, if I want to call it that. And I'm outlining the different edges, and then I'll go in with my darker brush, and then I'll make it not so saturated, highlighted. And even there, I felt it was a little too much, so then I went in with my darker brush. And if you can see my layers on the right side, I continually mask it out. And that way I can add something like a black shadow or something really quick without worrying about having to go outside of the hairline or working on the background layer. And then here, just continually are building up those values, and then I'll add in more of those individual strands. So I try to work large with hair first, and then I'll work in my smaller details after. So then I'll add a few more hair strands near the end and give the indication that that's where it's ending. There's a breakup of hair near the end. And I'm also using some overlays here as well to really pop out those shines in the reds. And then from here, I'll do one final liquify pass to push and pull some different areas and give it more of that design to it. And then I'm going to call it done. And in the next tutorial, I'm going to work on the body of the character. But for this, I wanted to show you guys how I work back and forth between the face and the hair, trying to keep that level of detail matching throughout. So when working on a character's face, try to keep the facial proportions in perspective and really work up your different values on keeping in mind where that light source is coming from. And always remember that white will add a quick and easy value to anything, but overuse it and it'll almost give the skin a gloss or a plastic feel. So use it sparingly, but really know that it's a quick shortcut on making something rounded out really fast. And then with the hair, try to work in shapes. Rather than trying to draw every single individual strand, it's easier and a lot more fun to work with hair when you're working with the shape of the hair, and you can focus more on the movement rather than the individual strands. So, as always, I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.